His laugh echoed across the conference room, short, sharp, and cruel. The kind of laugh that makes everyone freeze and pretend to study their notebooks. "Laura, you're reliable," Matt said, leaning back in his chair with that smirk I'd seen him use on vendors he was about to lowball. "But not exactly essential, you know." 12 people sat around that table. My coworkers. My team. People I'd trained, covered for, and helped through their worst weeks. Not one of them looked up. Someone coughed. Another shifted papers. The air conditioning hummed louder than it had any right to. My pulse hammered in my throat, but I forced my face into a smile. My hands trembled around my pen, so I gripped it tighter until my knuckles went white. He just called me replaceable. In front of everyone. I swallowed the anger rising in my chest and kept my voice steady. "I understand." Matt laughed again, already moving on to the next agenda item like he hadn't just gutted me in public. That was the moment something inside me went perfectly, completely still. Not angry. Not hurt. Just cold and clear and decided. My name is Laura Keene. I'm 38 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I'd spent 6 years as operations coordinator at Brightspan Logistics, a mid-size shipping company in Portland. 6 years of being the person who keeps the chaos from collapsing. I organized vendor schedules, handled client renewals, managed fleet maintenance logs, processed invoices, coordinated payroll discrepancies, every invisible thread that held the company together while everyone else got to focus on their actual jobs. I'd built systems from scratch when I started. The previous coordinator had quit without notice, leaving nothing but sticky notes and a desktop covered in unlabeled folders. I'd stayed late for 3 months straight, mapping every process, creating manuals, color-coding vendor contracts by renewal date. Not essential. That word kept playing in my head as I sat in my car after work that day, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. The parking garage was nearly empty. Everyone had gone home to their families while I sat there in the dim fluorescent light, staring at nothing. I didn't cry. I just sat there thinking one clear thought. If I'm not essential, then what happens when I stop being available? I went into work the next morning like nothing had happened. Matt was waiting by the coffee machine, overly cheerful in that way people get when they know they've crossed a line but don't want to apologize. He slapped my shoulder like we were old buddies. "No hard feelings about yesterday, right, Laura? Just business talk." "Of course not," I said, smiling at him. The smile felt like glass. Smooth on the surface but fragile enough to cut. He grinned, relieved, and walked away whistling. I poured my coffee and went to my desk. Then I opened a new document and started listing every single process I owned. Every email chain I managed. Every form that triggered payments. Every document with a deadline that only I tracked. The list grew to 3 pages by lunch. To anyone watching, it looked like I was reorganizing files. Just Laura being thorough again. Laura making spreadsheets nobody asked for. But I wasn't making chaos. I was mapping it. Every dependency, every fragile connection, every place where the system would break without someone who understood how the pieces fit together. I didn't plan revenge. I planned clarity. Matt started asking me to stay late again within days. It was like the meeting had never happened. "Just one more report, Laura. You're so fast at these. Can you handle this vendor issue? You're the only one who knows their system. The client needs this by morning." I'd do it myself, but you know how it is. Funny how "not essential" came with so many late-night requests. So I nodded and smiled and took detailed notes. I saved everything twice, once to the shared company drive where everyone could theoretically access it, and once to my private archive with better organization and context notes that actually made sense. I documented which vendor needed phone calls versus emails. Which clients had standing Tuesday calls. Which reports needed manual adjustments because our software couldn't handle the complexity. I made everything transparent and available. I just didn't make it intuitive to anyone but me. When Matt asked if I was working on something new, I said I was creating backup documentation. Good thinking, he said, not even looking at his screen. Always good to have redundancy. He had no idea what he'd just approved. My daughter Ellie had her first piano recital that Thursday evening. She'd been practicing, for Aleesha, for 3 months, her small fingers stumbling over the notes until they finally flowed smooth and sure. She'd asked me every day that week, "You'll be there, right, Mom?" I wouldn't miss it for anything, I'd promised. Then Matt called an emergency meeting at 4:30. "Urgent client prep," he said. "This could make or break the quarter." It turned out to be a PowerPoint presentation. For a client meeting that was still 2 weeks away. He needed it color-coded to match the company brand guidelines and wanted detailed talking points for each slide. My talking points. My research. My data analysis. I stayed until 7, perfecting slides that Matt would present as his own strategic planning. By the time I got to the school, the recital hall was dark. The parking lot was empty except for 3 cars. Ellie's teacher had recorded the performance. I watched it on her phone in the hallway, my daughter's small voice saying at the end, "That's okay. Mom's working really hard." Something inside me fractured so quietly I almost didn't feel it. 2 weeks later, the new VP came to tour our department. Amanda Pierce was sharp, efficient, and known for asking questions that made executives squirm. She stopped at the operations board where we tracked vendor performance. "This turnaround improvement is impressive," she said, pointing to the chart showing our 30% reduction in delays. "Matt, how did you implement this?" Matt didn't hesitate. "It's all about proactive management. Setting clear expectations, following up consistently, building relationships." He gestured broadly, like he was describing a philosophy he'd pioneered. I stood 3 feet behind him, holding the actual spreadsheet I'd built from scratch. The one with formulas that cross-referenced vendor history, seasonal patterns, and backup supplier ratings. 6 months of late nights compressed into cells and color codes. Amanda nodded, impressed. Matt's eyes flicked toward me for just a second, long enough for me to see that he knew exactly what he was doing. He took full credit while I stood there invisible. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. I looked in the bathroom mirror that evening and said it out loud. No one's going to see what I do until they can't see it at all. Not angry. Just resolved. The next morning, I went to HR and submitted a vacation request. 3 weeks starting in March. The first real vacation I'd taken in 6 years. Kelly and HR looked confused. 3 weeks? Laura, you've got like 8 weeks saved up. I know. I'm starting small. She processed the request, and I watched the approval notification pop up in my email an hour later. Matt had signed off without even a question. Of course he had. Why would not essential need coverage planning? I printed the approval and put it in my desk drawer. Then I began preparing for my absence with the kind of meticulous care I'd always given to my work. But this time, I wasn't making things easier for everyone else. I was making things exactly as difficult as they deserved to be. I spent the next 6 weeks documenting every single thread of my role with surgical precision. Login credentials for vendor portals, saved in the shared drive with file names like Q3_miscellaneous_logins_archive_final_V2, that technically contained everything but required patience to decode. Cross-check lists for invoice processing, uploaded as separate PDFs instead of one master document, each labeled by date rather than function. Vendor contact notes, detailed and thorough, but scattered across folders organized by my own logic rather than alphabetical or categorical. Everything was transparent. Everything was accessible. I wasn't hiding anything or taking proprietary information. I was just removing the one thing that made it all work, my institutional knowledge of how the pieces connected. Matt noticed my intense organization. He stopped by my desk one afternoon, watching me label folders with color-coded tabs. You're reorganizing again? Just trying to make things easier for everyone, I said, looking up with my most helpful smile. He nodded, visibly relieved. Good thinking, Laura. This is why you're so valuable. Valuable. Not essential. There was a difference, and we both knew it. HR sent Matt an email about coverage during my vacation. I saw it in the thread they CC'd me on. Kelly had asked, who will handle Laura's responsibilities while she's out? Should we bring in a temp? Matt's response was quick and dismissive, we'll manage fine. Laura's work is mostly procedural. The team can handle it. Procedural. That word joined reliable and not essential in the growing collection of insults disguised as compliments. Like my 6 years of experience could be reduced to following instructions anyone could execute. I printed that email too. Put it right next to the vacation approval in my desk drawer. Then I went back to work, handling the 100 small fires that erupted every day. The vendor who only responded to calls before 9. The client whose reports needed manual formatting because they used outdated software. The payroll system that glitched every third Thursday and required a specific sequence of overrides. All procedural. All simple. All things anyone could handle. I couldn't wait to see them try. My last day before vacation was a Friday in early March. I arrived early and created a binder, neat, organized, and completely useless without context. It had vendor lists without notes about their quirks. Process flows without the exceptions I'd memorized. Contact information without the relationship history that made communication work. At 3 o'clock, I walked to Matt's office and set the binder on his desk. This is everything you'll need while I'm gone, I said. He barely glanced up from his computer. You're too organized for your own good, Laura. It's what keeps the company running smoothly. He laughed, that same sharp, dismissive sound from the conference room. You make it sound like you're irreplaceable. I smiled, sweet and calm. I'm not. You said so yourself. He was already back to his email, waving me off. Have a great vacation. Don't think about work. I won't, I promised. And I meant it. I walked out of Brightspan at 5 o'clock that Friday, and for the first time in 6 years, I didn't check my email before bed. I didn't set an alarm for Monday morning. I didn't think about vendor schedules or client renewals or any of it. I was done being invisible while being indispensable. My phone buzzed on Sunday afternoon. 2 days into my vacation. It was a text from Nicole, one of the junior coordinators. Hey Laura, do you know where the client renewal forms are? Can't find them in the usual spot. I was at the park with Ellie, watching her on the swings. The sun was warm, and she was laughing, and I hadn't felt this relaxed in years. I looked at the text, then set my phone face down on the bench. 3 hours later, another message popped up, Matt's kind of panicking. The Reynolds client is on hold waiting for their renewal contract. I silenced my notifications and went back to reading my book. Ellie ran over, breathless and grinning. Can we get ice cream? Absolutely, I said. We spent the rest of the afternoon trying flavors and walking along the waterfront. My phone buzzed 14 more times. I didn't look at it once. That night, I finally checked. 23 unread messages. 12 from work numbers, 11 from coworkers. I marked them all as read and put my phone in a drawer. The emergency wasn't mine anymore. By the 5th day, I heard from Amanda, my friend who still worked in accounting. She called during lunch, and I answered because we'd been planning to meet up anyway. Laura, she said, her voice tight with stress. The VP is furious. The audit prep is a complete mess. Matt's blaming IT for not organizing the files properly. That's strange, I said, carefully neutral. Everything was labeled. I know. That's what I told him. But he can't find anything, and the auditors are arriving Monday. He's been staying until midnight every night trying to piece things together. I felt something twist in my chest, not quite satisfaction, not quite sorrow. More like the calm certainty that comes from watching gravity work exactly as predicted. "I'm sure he'll figure it out," I said. He told HR my work was mostly procedural. Amanda was quiet for a moment. "He really said that?" "In writing." She exhaled slowly. "Laura, I think you might be my hero." The emails kept coming. By the end of the first week, I had 37 unread messages flagged as urgent. Subject lines like, "Need guidance ASAP," and "Client threatening to leave," and "Where are the backup vendor contacts?" I didn't open any of them. This wasn't revenge. Not really. It was rest. Something I'd earned after 6 years of late nights and missed recitals and being treated like a piece of furniture, useful but invisible. I spent my days sleeping in, making breakfast with Ellie, going to the library, reorganizing my apartment. Simple things that felt revolutionary because I wasn't constantly thinking about work. At night, I'd check my phone and watch the unread count climb. 43. 51. 68. Each number was a small piece of proof that, not essential, had been a lie. I knew I should feel guilty. Part of me did. But a larger part felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. By the start of week 2, the internal audit had completely collapsed. I heard about it from Amanda, who texted me updates like she was narrating a slow-motion disaster. Vendor data doesn't match the invoices. Matt's blaming the software. Client reports are incomplete. 3 are threatening to audit us. The VP just called an emergency meeting. Matt looks like he hasn't slept in days. That last one made me pause. I'd worked with Matt for 4 years. I'd seen him stressed before, tight deadlines, demanding clients, budget cuts. But he'd always had me to fix things behind the scenes. Now he was learning what procedural work actually meant when you didn't understand the procedures. Amanda sent a photo from the office. Matt at his desk, surrounded by open binders and sticky notes, his tie loosened and his usually perfect hair disheveled. The caption read, "He's been here since 6 a.m. Looks like hell." I zoomed in on the photo. On his desk, barely visible, was my binder, open to a page that listed vendor contacts without any of the relationship notes that made them useful. I put my phone down and took Ellie to the movies. The VP called an emergency weekend meeting. I knew because Amanda texted me a play-by-play. Matt had tried to explain the missing audit data. She must have filed it wrong. The system's disorganized. But Kyle from IT had cut him off. "No, she documented everything perfectly. You just don't know how to use it. Every file is labeled, every process is written down. It's all there." According to Amanda, that line had silenced the entire conference room. The VP had asked the obvious question, "Then why can't we find anything?" Kyle's response was brutal in its simplicity. "Because Laura built a system that worked for someone who understood the context. Without her institutional knowledge, it's just data." Matt had apparently tried to argue that the system should be more intuitive, that any competent person should be able to follow it. The VP's response shut him down. Any competent person should have planned for coverage before approving a 3-week vacation for their key coordinator. Key coordinator. Not procedural worker. Not essential. The words I'd needed to hear 6 months ago, finally spoken when I wasn't there to hear them. Matt called me personally on day 12. I was cooking dinner, actual cooking, not reheating takeout, when my phone rang. I saw his name and almost declined it. But curiosity won. "Hello? Laura." His voice sounded ragged, desperate. "Could you hop on a quick call? Just to walk me through a few things? The vendor portal login isn't working, and the Reynolds contract needs." "I'm on vacation, Matt," I said calmly, stirring pasta sauce. A long pause. I could hear him breathing, could practically feel him trying to find the right words. "Right. Of course. You deserve your time off." Another pause. It's just, we really need you back. Need. Not want. Not would appreciate. Need. I'll be back on the 28th, just like my approved vacation schedule says, I replied. Right. Yes. Of course. His voice cracked slightly. We'll manage until then. He hung up without saying goodbye. I turned off the stove and stood there for a moment, processing. Then I called Ellie for dinner, and we ate together at the table, something we hadn't done on a weeknight in months. The real crisis hit on day 16. Thornton Industries, one of our biggest clients, pulled their account. Delayed reports, they said. Lack of communication. Unprofessional service. Amanda forwarded me the internal email chain. Matt had tried to salvage it, offering discounts and expedited service, but the client had already signed with a competitor. The loss represented about 18% of our quarterly revenue. Matt had tried delegating the recovery effort, but nobody knew the sequence. Which reports needed to go out first? Which client contact to approach? What the relationship history was. In the email chain, I could see him getting shorter and sharper with each reply. The confidence was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. There was a photo in the break room chat, Matt in the hallway, shoulders hunched, phone pressed to his ear. Someone had captioned it, Week 3 of Laura's vacation. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of being invisible until I was gone. Tired of a system that only valued people when they disappeared. But I also felt something else, ready. Ready to go back on my terms. I walked back into Brightspan on Monday morning, March 28th, at 8:45. The office felt different. Quieter. More tense. People looked up when I passed. Some smiled with genuine relief. Others looked away, guilty. The VP was waiting in the lobby. Amanda Pierce, in her sharp suit and sharper expression, actually stood when I entered. Laura. Thank God you're back. Matt appeared from the hallway, looking pale and smaller than I remembered. His tie was crooked, and there were dark circles under his eyes. We were just about to start the recovery meeting, he said, his voice careful and measured. Too careful. Then let's not keep everyone waiting, I said. I walked to the conference room, the same one where he'd laughed at me, and took a seat. Not at my usual spot near the end, but in the middle where everyone could see me. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't wait for Matt to start the meeting. I started it myself. I walked them through the system step by step. Where everything was. How the pieces connected. Why certain vendors needed calls before 9. Why the payroll glitch happened every third Thursday. The junior staff took notes frantically. Matt sat silent, his jaw tight. When I finished, I ended with one quiet statement. Matt presented our vendor improvement metrics as his management strategy last month. But the truth is, these aren't my processes or his processes. They're the company's backbone. And they only work when someone understands how to use them. The VP leaned forward, her expression sharp and focused. You're saying without you, none of this functions? I met her eyes and smiled gently. I'm saying it wasn't designed to function without understanding. Anyone can read a manual. Not everyone can read the situation. Kyle from IT nodded slowly. She's right. The documentation is perfect. But documentation isn't the same as knowledge. Matt opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but the VP raised her hand. We'll discuss this further, she said, looking directly at Matt. Laura, could you stay after? I'd like to speak with you privately. Matt's face went pale. He knew what that meant. HR called Matt to a meeting 2 days later. He didn't return to the operations floor after that. The official word was transferred to another division, some regional role that sounded important but had no real authority. Officially, it was a lateral move. Unofficially, everyone knew it was a demotion. The audit failure had cost him his credibility. The client loss had cost him his position. I didn't celebrate. Didn't gloat. I just sat at my desk and quietly updated my email signature, removing the word coordinator and replacing it with nothing yet. That would come soon enough. Kelly from HR stopped by that afternoon. I heard about Matt. Are you okay? I'm fine, I said honestly. For what it's worth, I read your documentation during the crisis. It was incredibly thorough. Thank you. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Did you plan this? I thought about that conference room laugh. About Ellie's recital. About 6 years of being essential while being told I wasn't. I planned to take a vacation, I said carefully. What happened after that was just gravity. The VP called me to her office on Friday afternoon. Amanda Pierce's office was corner positioned with windows overlooking the city. Sunlight streamed across her desk, where a folder sat with my name on it. Laura, I'll be direct. We'd like you to take over as operations manager. Double your current salary, full autonomy over your department, and direct report to me. I'd imagined this conversation during my vacation. Practiced different responses. Now that it was happening, I felt strangely calm. I appreciate the offer, I said. I have one condition. She raised an eyebrow. Which is? Every team member gets credited in reports. Real credit, not footnotes. When someone builds something, their name goes on it. Transparency moving forward. Amanda studied me for a long moment, then smiled. You know, that's exactly the kind of leadership we need. Agreed. She extended her hand. I shook it. There's one more thing, I added. I want 3 additional staff members for operations. We've been running understaffed for years. Done. Pick your team. I walked out of her office as operations manager, finally visible in a way that mattered. I spent my first month redesigning workflows so knowledge was shared, not hoarded. I created open documentation with context notes. I trained junior staff on not just what to do but why it mattered. I made sure everyone understood how their piece fit into the larger picture. When someone stayed late to fix a problem, I made sure the VP knew their name. When someone built a better process, I put their name on the presentation. I held weekly meetings where people could ask questions without fear. Where "I don't know" was acceptable, and learning was expected. It wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Making sure no one else would be called not essential, while holding everything together. Nicole, the junior coordinator, came to me after 2 weeks. This is different. I actually understand what I'm doing now. That's the point, I said. Knowledge shouldn't be a secret. The department transformed slowly but steadily. People stayed because they felt valued. Work got done because everyone understood the system. I saw Matt in the parking garage 3 weeks after the reorganization. It was early evening. Most people had gone home. He was getting into his car, looking tired but not quite as destroyed as he'd been. He saw me and stopped. We stood there in the fluorescent light, 10 feet apart. Laura, he said finally. You did well. It wasn't an apology. Wasn't even really an acknowledgement. But it was something. We all did, I replied. Not cold, not warm. Just factual. He looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe explain. Maybe justify. But I turned and walked to my car before he could. I didn't need his explanations. Didn't need closure or apologies or any of it. I had what mattered. Respect, recognition, and a team that would never be invisible while being indispensable. The engine started smooth, and I drove home to have dinner with Ellie. During a team meeting in April, one of our new interns asked me a question that made everyone laugh. Laura, you're so calm all the time. Don't you ever get angry? The room went quiet, waiting for my answer. I smiled, thinking about that conference room laugh. About 3 weeks of ignored emails. About the moment Matt called me, desperate and defeated. I do get angry, I said. I just save it for the right moment. When calm is louder than shouting. The intern nodded slowly, processing. That's kind of brilliant. It's practical, I corrected. Anger without strategy is just noise. But anger with patience? That changes things. Kyle from IT laughed. Is that what you call your vacation? Patience? I call it rest, I said. Everything else was just gravity. The team laughed, and we moved on to the next agenda item. But I saw a few of them taking notes, filing away that lesson for their own careers. That's what good leadership looked like. Not hoarding knowledge, but sharing wisdom. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. Ellie was beside me, working on homework but mostly just enjoying the warm spring air. She looked up from her math problems. Mom, are you happy now? I thought about it. Really thought about it. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible and overworked. 3 months ago, I'd been humiliated in public. 1 month ago, I'd been on vacation watching my company panic without me. Now I was operations manager with a team I was building to last. I left work at 5 most days. I'd been to every one of Ellie's practices since returning. Yes, I said. Because I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who'd already decided not to see it. She smiled and went back to her homework. I sat there as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, thinking about everyone who'd ever felt invisible at work. Who'd been called reliable, but not essential. Who'd given everything and gotten nothing but dismissal. If you've ever been there, remember this: invisibility isn't emptiness. It's quiet power, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. And when that moment comes, don't shout. Let your absence speak louder than your presence ever could. Then build something better from what remains.